Joining us is Professor Rob Natelson, probably the most read and studied on this process of anybody involved. How much is this like what you think the founders might have envisioned?
Well, they certainly wouldn't envision the video system, and they would not have
Or these
envisioned the
microphones?
microphones, right? And they probably would be very pleasantly surprised at the number of states involved. They would recognize North Carolina and Georgia and Massachusetts, but there would be some very unfamiliar names. They probably thought of Wyoming as a portion of Pennsylvania or New York, which it was at that time.
Wow.
Not the current state, but the name. The procedure that's followed, however, is very close to that historically used by conventions of states all the way from the 1600s up until the last one we had, which was in 1922.
So this is not as new as what sometimes we think of it as. We think it's a whole new concept. No, this is actually a proven concept that's been used.
That's right. In fact, we've identified about 37 conventions of states or before independence of colonies.
Yeah.
The rules that they're operating under today were rules that were crafted based upon that accumulated experience. The last general convention, that is the last convention to which all states were invited, was held in 1861 in Washington, D.C. And so we use those rules as the basis for these rules. Of course, we had to update them to take into account such things as tablet computers.
Right, and truncate them a little for our simulated convention.
That's correct.
You write extensively about this, and folks, if you go to conventionofstates.com and click on Learn, you can actually see a lot of this history where you document it, you footnote it, it's all there. Let's talk about what just happened. So the first vote on an actual proposed amendment to the Constitution just passed by these guys.
Right. Under the rules, there are three separate committees, and one of those committees deals with the problem of federal fiscal excess. It comes up with proposals to try to rein that in. The first proposal was one of theirs, and it is essentially a balanced budget amendment. But instead of specifying revenues and expenditures, it talks in terms of debt. You can't run additional debt without a two-thirds vote of both houses of Congress, and that therefore requires a balanced budget. And so what we saw was that committee report discussed and then approved on a roll call of the states, as you can see, overwhelmingly. There were also two efforts to try to amend it, and the commissioners decided not to amend it.
And it was, what, 44-4 and just a few against?
Yeah, that's right. It was overwhelming.
And if this were the actual convention of states, that proposed amendment would then go back to all 50 states for ratification.
That's right. That would be the proposal process, and it would be up to Congress then to decide whether it wanted conventions or legislatures in the states to ratify. But either way, you would still need 38 states to approve it, which is a pretty tough bar.
Right, which it's fortunately a very popular amendment and would have a good chance. We're going to go back to the actual action. They've taken up another amendment. Let's see what that one's all about.
Because the Commerce Clause, in my mind, has been terribly abused by the Supreme Court. So, Professor, what can we accomplish by attempting to amend the Commerce Clause, and why the Commerce Clause?
Well, the Commerce Clause is a part of the list of powers of Congress in the Constitution. And what it says is that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations among the several states and with the Indian tribes. And its original understanding was to enable Congress to regulate, say, the shipment of goods between state lines, and also certain incidents or ancillary matters having to do with the shipment of goods, as well as the shipment of goods and other things with foreign nations, with the Indian tribes. Over the years, the Supreme Court has interpreted the Commerce Clause in conjunction with another clause called the Necessary and Proper Clause to enable the Congress to control the entire American economy, not just that portion having to do with the shipment of goods and articles across state lines. So now we see the Congress regulating manufacturing, land use, mining, agriculture. The list goes on. And that was not within the original purview of the Constitution. So the intent of the amendment is to try to move the Constitution back to what was originally understood.
So, Professor, if an amendment like this, and we've seen the verbiage of the language of this amendment on the screens, and our viewers have seen that as well, what would be the impact if such an amendment were proposed by this body today and then ratified by 38 states and then implemented as an amendment to the Constitution?
Well, Congress would still have an enormous amount of power as far as regulating the economy is concerned. But certain matters, such as the regulation of manufacturing, labor relations, agriculture, and so forth, would be carried out at the state rather than the federal level.
Let's talk about why the states are having to jump in on this, right? Because we never amended the actual Commerce Clause to the Constitution. It's never been amended. But Chief Justice Roberts said in the Obamacare case that their power is well established. My question is, well established by whom? We, the people, never expanded it, but the court expanded it. So is this the only way for us to overturn that expansion?
Effectively, it's proven to be the only way. Over the years, people have said, well, if we can elect presidents who will appoint Supreme Court justices, that'll bring about change. But that, in fact, hasn't worked.
Yeah.
So we have to do it by constitutional amendment. I will tell you there's precedent for this, not specifically a convention, but there are several instances in which constitutional amendments were adopted specifically to override the U.S. Supreme Court. The founding generation encountered a decision very early on in our history in which they thought the Supreme Court was expanding its own power too much, so they passed the 11th Amendment, which overturned that opinion. The notorious Dred Scott opinion or decision of 1857, which declared that an African American could never, ever be a citizen of the United States, an obviously erroneous decision, was overturned by the 14th Amendment. And most recently, a very confused Supreme Court opinion in Mitchell versus Oregon, adopted in 1970, was overturned by the 26th Amendment. So there is a pattern, and the founders envisioned the use of the amendment process for that,
well, they certainly
that purpose.
They never envisioned the court to have the final say on every law in America and to essentially run the country.
Well,
so there had to be a place for being able to overturn them.
They did envision the court having the power of judicial review.
Sure.
But they also envisioned the use of the amendment process as a way to rein in the court and, in fact, other branches of the federal government as well.
Yeah. All right, let's get back to the action on the floor.
These people are tired of federal overreach.
We've been going back and forth. We've been debating amendments. We had committee hearings yesterday.
Today's the day. The winds of change are about to blow.
I can see the optimism.
It's exciting to meet legislators from across the country.
And just the electricity, the energy to discuss solutions.
It was the most extraordinary thing in my career that I've ever been a part of.
It shows a commitment to wanting to do it right.
None of us have ever seen this before, right?
That our founding fathers were, in fact, right yet again.
The process actually works.
The very idea that I stood where Patrick Henry